You like that?
Yeah. This way you're gonna turn both ways. Down there I can look.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep everybody in.
We good? Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to call to order the Wednesday, January 20th, 2021, Masco Regional District School Committee meeting. We are live streaming and recording this meeting, and due to COVID-related restrictions, we don't have any public audience tonight. School committee member Arete Pasucci is joining us via phone this evening, and Bonnie is coming. She's just running a little bit late. So I'd like to take a moment to remember one of our students. Last week, Finn McCabe, a 7th grade student in our middle school, passed away.
You need to do water.
On behalf of the school committee, I am extending our sympathies to Finn's family, friends, and teachers, and I'd like to have a moment of silence to honor her memory. Thank you. Before we start our packed agenda tonight, I'd also like to ask Mike to give us a brief update on 2 current items: the high school principal search and the school's review of the daily class schedule. This is just going to be a quick update for informational purposes, and then we'll move on with our agenda, if that's okay.
Yeah,
with
that's
you.
fine.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so with regards to the high school principal search, we started interviewing candidates yesterday. Was that just yesterday, Phil? It was. Feels like a long time ago, but it was yesterday afternoon. So we had, what was it, 4 candidates yesterday afternoon. We will meet with another 3 candidates tomorrow afternoon. After that, the interview committee will deliberate and recommend at least 2 finalists, so we're hoping at least 2. And the plan right now is to have those 2 finalists come back to us next Wednesday and Thursday. They'll spend a good part of the day here in the district, and then in the evening we'll have some public interviews on Zoom. I'll moderate, and just it'll be an open question and answer session for the candidates to meet with the communities. During the day, the candidates will meet with faculty. They'll meet with the members of the leadership team. They'll meet with high school administration. They'll meet with all of our student government reps. All 74 of them, I believe, have been invited. So there'll be a lot of it electronic because we're restricted from those in-person meetings. They'll actually meet with the executive leadership team in person because it's a small group. And each of those groups will be asked to provide feedback. I've got a Google Doc set up that'll go into the all of those Zoom sessions so that people can access them and complete a questionnaire on each of the candidates that I can take a look at after both visits are done. And then after that, we're going to have to discuss how we would actually even approach maybe doing a site visit to the candidates' home districts. Again, COVID makes this all much more difficult, so we'll figure that out. That'll probably happen first week in February. Ultimately, the plan is to have a hire done during the week of February vacation. Have it done by then, have things done by March 1st, really. So, and then in regards to the schedule, so we've implemented the WIN block. We continued to meet with the Teachers Association. Most recently was last Thursday to discuss schedules. I don't foresee any other schedule changes for this year. I think we've talked it around and around and around, and Natasha's been part of these meetings, and so has Phil. And I think we've looked at the pros and cons of making changes, and I think we've kind of landed on the fact that what we have is as good as we think we can get it at this point. We have committed to meeting again in early March. And part of that is to talk about, what does September look like? There's some things that people really like about this schedule, and, they want to see how we can maybe preserve that and carry it forward into the next year. So that's where we are right now on schedule.
Okay, so just to clarify, September like full in person, but maybe
That's the
tweaking
plan.
the schedule.
That's the plan, yeah. I think
Okay.
Windlock has been wildly successful, and so
Okay.
it's how do we get that into our schedule?
Okay,
I think it's one of the questions people have.
thank you. Thank you for that.
Process.
This posted on that stuff.
Costa's
Okay.
got a quick question, I think. With regard to being able to be in person, in September, have you been given any information as to when the teachers might be vaccinated?
Very preliminarily, I was actually on a call with Derek Fullerton today, and they are talking February, March timeframe to try and set something up. Right now, at least this was, from Derek's plan, was to try and have, the public health representatives from the three towns actually come here, or have all of us go to the Topsfield Fairgrounds on a Saturday. We're still trying to figure out what the best way to do that is to get everybody vaccinated as quickly as possible. But
So this would be not through the state is
right.
setting up a vaccination site at the Doubletree, but this would be done independently.
Yeah, the state is setting up what they're calling the mega site up at the Doubletree, but at least that's right now the thinking, as I said, as of this afternoon, was that the K-12 schools would be done by the local public health departments.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, can't wait.
Right. Okay. All right. We'll move on to comments from the audience. We're going to continue our procedure, the one that we've used in our last several in-person meetings. We'll read the emails sent in to us as we explained on the agenda that went out. As a matter of protocol regarding comments from the audience, the committee will not respond to these emailed comments after they are read. We may choose to address the topics later in the meeting if it fits into an agenda item, otherwise at a future meeting. So this meeting, I received 4 emails that people asked to read at the meeting tonight, and I have asked my fellow members to share in reading them. Kristen, you want to go first?
Sure. This message is from Keith Bavardi. It says, "Hi Carolyn, per my email exchange with Kristen earlier today and in advance of tomorrow's school committee meeting, I would like to raise the following. I just reviewed Michael Harvey's presentation for tomorrow's school committee meeting that will include a presentation of the athletic budget, including user fees. I truly hope all of the discussions and data that a number of Masco parents have provided on the comparison of Masco fees to all other communities has been seriously considered in forming their recommendations. Furthermore, I would like for Jeff and Michael to articulate how the $116,000 athletic budget balance at the beginning of this fiscal year, as well as what also would be a reduction in the actual costs in a COVID year, given the reduction in games and lack of state tournaments, thereby increasing this balance, was considered in forming the user fees. For example, if there is a $116,000 balance in the athletic account and user fees contributed 60% of the athletic budget in prior years, then Masco families contributed almost $70,000 of that money. Thank you. Regards, Keith."
Thank you. Costa, you want to go ahead?
This is from Corin Mitchell of Middleton. Good morning. I am hoping for an update on the ongoing discussion about class schedule adjustments. At the last meeting, it was noted by the superintendent that he has a meeting scheduled for 1/4 regarding this.
Thank you. Zillian.
This message is from Kathleen Scarpato of Topsfield. Kathleen writes, "I'm writing to ask the obvious question at the top of every parent's mind. What is the plan to get all students back in the classroom, preferably this year? It seems as if this question has been repeatedly kicked down the road, yet it needs to be the priority. Isn't such a plan necessary in order to set a budget and negotiate contracts? The science seems to indicate that the dangers to the emotional and mental health of our children are far outpacing the dangers of COVID. Vaccines are now available and our teachers should be getting them soon. DESE and CDC guidelines show that 3 feet is an appropriate social distance in the classroom. With all that being said, I certainly hope that all students will be able to attend school in person before the end of the third quarter at the latest. I also would like to receive more information on the COVID numbers in the Masco community. We all recognize that COVID numbers are on the rise, but we have not heard any breakdown on what those numbers mean. Please let us know the number of 1. Teachers vs. students cases, 2. In-school versus remote teachers and student cases, 3. Hospitalizations. It would also be helpful to know any available information on how and where these cases were contracted. Finally, we have heard for months that plans were in the works to improve hybrid, but other than adding wind to the schedule, we have seen nothing else on this front. Will we see changes in second semester, and what will those changes be? Thank you.
Thanks. And Tasha, can you do the last one, please?
Yep. This is from Subcommittee. Hi, I know this is coming after the deadline for community member email, so totally understand. I just wanted to take the time to point out the obvious in that the number of students participating in hybrid learning has dwindled tremendously. My daughter is in 7th grade. She regularly takes the bus, and there are constantly only 2 other students riding with her each morning, and sometimes as many as 4 others in the afternoon. One day there were only 1 other student on the bus. I actually worry about the possibility of her being the only person, a 12-year-old girl, riding a bus alone. Her classes are very small and keep getting smaller. Most have 4 to 6 students and often only have 2 to 3 in a class. Her friends tell her she is lucky because they even have less kids in classes on their team. My point is to say that full in-person would be feasible option given the large number of kids choosing full remote. I realize that there are a lot of logistics to consider in implementing it, but I have faith the school committee and administration could do it. I hope it's being considered. Thank you to everyone for all their hard work. We appreciate the hard work by you and especially the administration and teachers. Sue Sheldon, Middleton.
Thank you, and thank you to the people that wrote to us to give us their feedback. Next up is a report from the Student Advisory Board. Tonight we have Stella Nagel with us. Stella, can you just quickly introduce yourself and then share any comments you have?
Yes. Hi, I'm Stella Nagel, and I'm the class of 2023. It's Student Advisory Board representative. And so I'll just be sharing some things that have been brought to me by the students.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I would like to thank the Public Relations Subcommittee for including the Student Council with their work towards uniting and bringing together the community. In preparation for tonight, I've sought out feedback from the Student Council reps and other members of the student body regarding their thoughts for how this year is going. Here is the information that I've obtained from many of the students. Many of the students appreciate the WIN block and the time it gives us to meet with teachers, prepare for tests and quizzes, and complete homework, which relieves stress for many of the students. The biggest feedback that I've gotten from the student body is the lack of students that are coming into school. Many students are joined by only a few of their classmates physically in the classroom, making Masco seem a lot less energetic. Another question that was brought to me is will there be end of the year finals, or will we do the 40-60 split that we had at the end of last year? I also wanted to appreciate Dr. Harvey, Mr. McManus, and Ms. Bullard for their work with the high school principal search committee. The student body is impressed by their commitment to stakeholder engagement, and the student council is honored to help play a role in this process. I also wanted to thank Mr. Delaney and the school administration for working with student leadership to find a meaningful and suitable replacement for the senior internships. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share the thoughts and opinions on behalf of the student body.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nice job.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about the, generally speaking, the lack of kids in the school and on the bus and all of that. Wasn't what we expected, I'll put it that way. We'd love to see more kids in school,
We're here.
but it is up to them. Okay. Thank you, Stella. We will move on to Phil's McManus's middle school principal report, please.
Okay, thanks for having me here tonight. I have the middle school update for you. So, general update. I'll stick with our pros to start. Attendance continues to be strong, and when I say attendance, I mean attendance between the remote students and the in-person students. I'm going to show you some data on that in just a minute here, but our attendance does continue to be strong, and it's higher than what we have seen in our pre-pandemic year. You heard Dr. Harvey say earlier that WinBlock is working well. We've had quite a bit of positive feedback from both teachers and students. Students have been using it to connect with teachers for extra help. They've been using it to complete classwork. They use it for free reading time sometimes, whatever it may be. It's being used well, and it's being used in a smart manner. It also does provide us with that flexibility so that if we are conducting an assembly or we're doing a different activity or some community building that I'll talk about later, it gives us that flexibility during the day that would have interrupted class time before. After the lowest in-person numbers we saw before break, we have noticed an uptick in students attending in person since the winter break in December. I know that's a bit contradictory from some of what we've just heard right now, but again, I'll show you the data on that, and more students in the middle school at least are attending in person in the last couple of weeks. Cons, this is a repeat from what I've talked about before, but there still is a general stress among teachers as instruction is much harder in this environment. I think that will continue through the school year. That's why we are addressing that with some community activities that are safe and virtual so that we can try and connect people on a greater basis because it's been so difficult during this type of learning environment. And I know that students do continue to feel stress as well, and we're reaching out to them, and again, we have some more community building type activities that we're working towards to try to unite students with each other in a better fashion. So the attendance data here, this is for last week starting on January 12th up until January 19th is the most recent date that they have. I'm going to share with you tonight. So you can see that the overall present percentage, 98.7%, 98, close to 99 on a couple of days. So students attending school has been very strong this year. Our percent remote there, you can see there's some pretty big variation on some of the days. You're looking at 68% on some days, up to 76% were remote on the 15th. That happened to be the Friday before a long weekend. So that trend does continue when you have a vacation coming up or you have a long weekend. More kids tend to be remote on that day before. But then it's down to 65% on the 19th. So it's better than what we were seeing before break. Before break, we were consistently in the 70 percentile every day with kids being fully remote. So that has ticked down a bit since then, which is good to see. And we hope that those numbers will continue to rise for children attending in person. Yes?
Is that because, like, Group A versus Group B? So Group A would be the, I don't know which is which, but the 68, the 68, the 65, and B would be 73, 76?
Sure. You could make that correlation for sure. I think for the 15th, part of it is what I just said with the Friday before vacation. We have seen on an anecdotal basis that, this data does show it as well, but just from a quick count in the cafeteria, the cohort B day, students do seem to attend more frequently in person than the cohort A days. I don't know what that is attributable to, but yeah, that's a good point out. Okay. So community building. Faculty, staff, and the student council are organizing a food drive right now to benefit local organizations. Some of the places that they worked with in the past are the food pantry in Middleton, and there's also one in Hamilton that we've sent donations to. So we are going to be working with them again moving forward, and we're organizing a food drive that can be contributed to by both in-person students excuse me, and remote students. So students who are fully remote can come to campus, and we'll have a bin outside where they can drop off items, and then we'll also collect items in school. We want to add a little bit of a competition to it where we will tally the food donations by team so that there's some healthy and fun competition. We'll make it a little contest to see who can bring in the most. So we're going to be getting that rolling in the next couple of weeks. Masco Connects, that's a new initiative here in the middle school. It is headed up by school counselor Jessica Goldberg, as well as a group of faculty members, and that's a 100% voluntary faculty group that is meeting to find ways to connect the middle school student body through various safe activities. They have a whole bunch of different ideas. I don't have anything specific to share with you yet. They just had their first meeting at the end of last week, but they are coming up with some ways to build community through some virtual activities that will involve both in-person and fully remote students. And one thing that we already did right before the holidays, we had a holiday card making activity that we ran during the wind blocks, and students drew, wrote, created holiday greeting cards that we then shared with the 3 communities councils on aging, and then we also sent a whole package of cards over to the Masconomet Health Center, the nursing home over in Topsfield. So that worked out really well. We had a lot of really great feedback on that. So we plan to do something similar for Valentine's Day and specifically target the councils on aging. A lot of the folks that they work with are seniors they're all seniors who live in the communities, but they're very isolated during this time of the pandemic, and they don't have a lot of visitors. So to be able to receive cards from young people here at Masco is very uplifting for them. So we're going to continue with that as well. So a couple of fun photos, the birch drawings. You got an email about this from one of our art teachers, Ursina Ambler. So there's a couple of examples that are hanging up in the hallways right now. The kids did really well with this, and they loved the project, so I thought it would be good to show those again. And then 7th grade science, Miss Westcott's class was working on a project this week, collaborating on an ecology assignment. We used Google Jamboard, which has been a big hit among teachers and students as one of the software applications that we have to use. And they're doing reading, analyzing data, watching videos, and they're responding to the group. One of the things with the ecology project that they were working on was human or natural disruptions that can lead to changes in the ecosystem and the population. And students responded very well, and Ms. Westcott was happy to share that with you tonight. So that was 7th grade science. And then for STEM, Mr. Malio responded. His students are working on a CAD software project, and they're creating their dream remote learning, study, and hangout space. So they're doing a simple 3D Tinkercad, it's called, program that they use to design this space, and I will show you some time-lapse video from a student. His name is Will Harney, and he created this, so I hope this link works for you tonight to see what it looks like. It's showing over here. It's not showing up on the screen, TJ.
Describe it to us.
TJ, help. So it's on the screen there, but it's not showing up on the projector. There we go. So it's a quick time-lapse video there for you of what he's doing to create this dream learning space. And again, that's Will Harney. He's a 7th grader here. He's an 8th grader here. Thanks. And lastly here are a couple of photos from that same class, from the STEM class of students working on their project.
So that wraps it up for me tonight, short and sweet. That's what's going on in the middle school and some of what we're doing and what we have coming up. So thanks.
Thank you, Bill. I think we have a few questions. Bill?
Yes.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the update, you mentioned again that stress was a very significant issue, both with the teachers because of it's just hard to teach in this environment as well as the students. But then I guess I was a little, or didn't quite follow that the community building is or at least one of the remedies that or approaches you're taking to address that. Certainly, I get it if you're confident that the primary cause is lack of community that kids are experiencing. But I guess I don't know that for sure. I'm also wondering if there are academic things which are causing stress for students, particularly seventh graders who are new to Masco and this, kind of thrown into it. So I guess I want you to, discuss a little bit of your thinking about, the various root causes of the stress that the faculty and the students are experiencing, and if you think, this community building stuff seems great, and I'm sure that will have an impact. Do you think it's enough? If there are other root causes, what other things might you consider to try to address those?
Well, that's a big question for tonight.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of root causes of the stress. We are seeing COVID cases in the community and among families and family spread of those cases, which is definitely affecting students. It is harder to learn in this type of environment, and I think that kids have adjusted pretty well. But when you are shifting between remote learning at home and coming into school, there is that switch in schedules that students have to balance, as well as we know that there are students who just don't thrive in this type of environment and they really would prefer to be in 5 days, but it's simply not possible this year. And I think just the general stress of the pandemic overall. We saw a very tumultuous couple of weeks in Washington. We saw we experienced the death in the community of Finn Cade. That was very recent. Just the general stress that you see in the winter with the short days and the cold weather, that's natural. I think it's all contributing to it. As far as how we're addressing it, the community building is one piece, because we know in middle school and in any school that's a huge part of student support for each other. Teachers are reaching out to students. They're making time and being available to them to support them the best that they can, especially if they notice them struggling or something like that. We have our school adjustment counselors and our school counselors who are available to kids, especially on an individual basis, and we do reach out to families if we notice that there's a particular concern or a student isn't performing maybe as well as they normally do, and we set up time for them to meet on Blackboard, things like that. So, some of it's a case-by-case approach, some of it's a bigger approach, which is the community building that you see. But we are limited in a lot of ways just by virtue of how school is run this year in a hybrid environment. So, normally before February vacation, say, we'd set up a big assembly down in the gym, and all the kids would file in on Friday, and we'd do some kind of a faculty on student basketball game or whatever it might be. But we can't do anything like that this year. And those are the kinds of events that bring the group of students and the community together and to bond as classes, and we're not able to do that. So I think that's a big lacking factor that hurts us this year.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Zilly?
I understand that there's a lot of things we can't do, but a lot of times when I hear the comment, like, we can't do anything like that this year, my mind immediately starts spinning with alternative ideas. And I'm wondering if that's sort of what this Masco Connects initiative is?
Yep.
Are they trying to find virtual options for like smaller group versions of game interactive community fostering activities that could fill the gap that's left by not having the staff student basketball game and stuff like that?
Yes, that's the goal. That's what they are trying to do, and that's what they're working on. And again, I don't want to speak for them, and I don't have more specifics to share with you, but that's what they're working towards.
Good for them. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's 100% volunteer. That's 100% faculty-led. They're meeting outside of school days after extra help, starting at 3 o'clock, and on Blackboard to put together these ideas and get some programs rolling. So I do applaud them for that.
All right, anyone else? Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Phil. Thank you.
You're
for that,
welcome.
Phil.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Okay, all right, the main event, the FY22 Superintendent Recommended Budget Presentation. Jeff and Mike.
A couple of comments before we get started. You should have a copy of the presentation and a handout. I'll call it the budget book. So this provides lots of layers of detail behind kind of the overview presentation that we'll make tonight, and we'll kind of unpack this over the next 7 weeks. So Mike and I are going to do this, or make this presentation together. So I'll start, and we'll kind of go back and forth between some slides. So before I get started, it is an overview presentation. We're not going to get into an extraordinary amount of detail tonight. We're going to introduce kind of the recommendation to you at a pretty high level, and then again begin to get into some of the detail like we did last year, and some of the major expense increase areas that we'll go over in a few minutes. So before I briefly discuss the budget process, just a couple of comments. So an extraordinarily challenging kind of couple of months as we put the budget together. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of unknowns. There's respect for and pressure with our member towns, and hopefully our recommendation reflects our understanding for those pressures and our attempt to put our best foot forward in a really challenging way, to present a budget that balances the needs of the district with the needs of our 3 member towns. So hopefully they see it that way too. So, and then, everyone is working really hard, right? From the MPFTs to the secretaries to the teachers to all the administrators. So, to make some of the recommendations that we're going to make are hard, really hard. So, with that said, a few minutes on the process. You saw the slide last year, so I won't spend too much time on it. So the first 3 boxes represent October, November, and December. And that's really where we do kind of our behind-the-scenes planning work, starting with October enrollments, E&D with the DOR. That really kicks off the process. Then in November.
Just a quick point, Jeff.
Sure.
We may have heard it before, but the audience may not have. So give us the full shot.
You got it. I love to talk, though. So
I know.
So in November, that's really the month where we kick off the process internally. We had somewhere between 25 and 30 members of our team here at Masco involved in the process, putting materials together, submitting requests and recommendations, all those kinds of things. And then December is really the month where I take that information and I kind of make the soup and, spend time with Mike and the executive leadership team to get to the point tonight, right? So that's the first red box, middle row on the left, where kind of all that hard work for those previous 3 months comes together, and we make the superintendent's recommendation to the school committee and community tonight. So, and then over the course of the next 6 or 7 weeks, we'll deliberate, we'll unpack, we'll create transparency around our recommendation. We'll spend time with the budget subcommittee. We'll spend time with the various finance committees and boards of selectmen at their request. And then second week of March, I think it's March 10th or 11th? 10th. On March 10th, the school committee will hold its second public hearing and then have its final deliberation and look to adopt a budget. And then in April, we'll spend more time with the towns, and hopefully in May, we've got our 3 town meetings. So that's the process from a kind of a 10,000-foot perspective. So let's get into some of the numbers and kind of start to tear this thing apart a little bit. So Mike's kind of chatting.
So as you know, as we work through those first 3 months in the budget process, we generally, as a practice, start with a level service budget. So, the idea is, okay, what do we have here in FY21, and what would it cost just to roll that into FY22? This year, when we actually completed that exercise, that we realized that that increase was not something that we could, in good conscience put forward. And so what we have here is, what the budget we're going to talk about tonight is a level service budget with adjustments in our staffing model. And as I said, level service is a continuation of the current services, programs, and operations, move forward a year. For FY22, the recommended budget, level service with adjustments to staffing, will reflect an increase in total operating expenses of $973,237, or 2.7%, and an increase of $836,416, or 2.9%, in our total operating assessment versus the approved FY21 budget.
So as we think about those numbers, let's talk a little bit about the key assumption highlights that we've kind of factored into the development of this level service budget with these staffing adjustments. So I like to break kind of the key assumptions into 2 categories, but first I'm going to start at the bottom where it says note. So when we look at and we think about our revenues in the next slide, just understand that the numbers that I've used in the budget recommendation are the final FY21 numbers that were only finalized a week or so before Christmas. So that's the best data I have right now. I've read in a few places that we might anticipate seeing an FY22 preliminary cherry sheet and net school spending reports either last week of January or first week of February. So as soon as I have those, I'll obviously incorporate them into the recommendation, and then we'll go from there. But just realize that they're FY21 final. So I won't spend a lot of time on those numbers just yet, and hopefully we'll have them for the next meeting, and then I can really get into some details around revenue and offsets at that point, so we don't have to repeat ourselves. So key assumptions, salary costs. The budget incorporates contractual salary increases as well as placeholder increases for successor teacher and paraprofessional agreements. It incorporates all other contractual salary obligations like steps and degree changes. It incorporates anticipated staff retirement, replacement, salary savings. It includes a proposal to further reduce staffing by 7.6 FTE. If you recall, our final budget for FY21, which is the year we're in, reduced our staffing by 11. So in a 2-year span, you're talking about 19 FTE. That's really significant. We've level funded grants as compared to the FY21 budget. From an operating cost perspective, as Mike mentioned, no new services or programs. Again, we've level funded or assumed to level fund grants. The recommendation incorporates level service discretionary expense requests from principals, department heads, and operational unit directors. So that goes back to that second or third red box or black box where we saw it and were provided input from members, 25 or 30 members of our team. The recommendation incorporates contractual service contract increases. So if you recall, we put out to bid our regular transportation and janitorial services contract last summer. We're in year one of that contract. The contract is itemized, so you simply go back to those contracts and you grab those numbers and you put them in the budget. Really, there's nothing to discuss there. Recommendation includes an increase in the appropriation from the Essex Regional Retirement Board. So you'll see that increase from 21 to 22 is $83,000. There's really nothing we can do about that. That's our appropriation. Includes all known out-of-district placement tuitions and related transportation costs. Integrates other special education expense increases based on projected student needs. Includes a placeholder increase of 2.5% for healthcare and dental premiums. So that's an overview of the key assumptions in the next slide. So Mike, I can do this, or you can check.
You do this one.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll kind of refer to this as our P&L, even though it's really not a P&L. So top section is expenditures. I'm going to get up my little trusty pointer. And again, I won't go into the details of offsets and revenues quite yet until we get final numbers, and then I'll really scour them for you guys and hopefully at the next meeting. So this number here, this 2.7 number, $973,000 increase. So that's the increase in our net operating expenses over the current year. This next section is our revenue sources. As you can see, we've got Chapter 70, transportation reimbursement, so on and so forth. All of these numbers from the state are from that final FY21 cherry sheet. I will call out one line for you guys and then go into a lot more detail when we talk about revenues at the next meeting. So the excess and deficiency line, you can see a pretty significant increase year over year. So what I've done there is, as you know, back in October, or actually late September, the DOR certified our excess and deficiency at a little over $2 million. It was in excess of the statutory kind of upper threshold of 5% of our budget. So we had to give back the difference, right, which is about $302,000. So we gave the towns that money back in November, which left us with our allowable maximum of 5% of our budget. So it's about $1.8 million. So last year, or in the current year, this number here, that number was the amount above 4% of our budget. So what I did in this recommendation is I kind of applied that same standard, and I said, okay, calculate the amount above the 4% of our budget in certified E&D, and that number was $361,000. So I've applied that there. We know from my forecast, my updated forecast just before the holidays, that we believe we'll need $200,000 or $300,000 in E&D, which would leave us in excess of $1 million. So I was really comfortable, based on our last forecast, that we could afford to do this and still have a meaningful amount of money left in our E&D balance. I'll update the forecasts in either early or definitely by the second meeting in February, and I don't anticipate much of a change there, but we can talk about that in a lot more detail when we talk about revenues. in the future. And then at the bottom here, you can see that our operating assessment, as Mike mentioned, is increasing by a little over $830,000, or 2.9%. So we've got 3-member towns, so let's take a quick look at how that is kind of broken up by member community. And let's really focus on just the operating assessment piece of it, because the debt assessment really isn't a meaningful number. And as you all know, our regional agreement really prescribes how we go about calculating this, right? So, and enrollment in the current year plays a pretty significant role in how we apportion the operating assessment. So when you put it all through the sausage maker, right? So again, using final FY21 numbers, including net school spending, which is an important part of our apportionment calculation, and that will be updated. You can see that Boxford's operating assessment is increasing by 1%. Remember, the average is 2.9%. So Boxford is increasing by 1%, or a little over $112,000. Middleton's operating assessment is increasing by 3%, slightly above the average for the district. And then Topsfield, who, as we all know, saw a pretty meaningful shift in its enrollment in this last October 1st enrollment report, is increasing by 5.4%. So again, for a net assessment increase of 2.9%.
Jeff, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's a cherry sheet? I should have asked that when you said it earlier. I'm not familiar with that term.
So a cherry sheet is layman's terms. So it's a schedule that's prepared by the state.
Okay.
That kind of itemizes sources of revenues and expenditures that you can anticipate to either receive or be charged in the event that that particular annual budget is approved by the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you.
And it got its name cherry sheet because
It's on red paper.
It's on red paper.
prior to the electronic.
So the governor's proposed budget will be the first cherry sheet that comes out, and
Okay,
then
thank you.
as the
I
House
wasn't familiar
gets
with that
it and
term.
gets their budget,
Okay.
there'll be an updated, and then when the Senate gets their version, there'll be an updated, and then there'll be a final one when the reconciliation goes and they approve a final budget.
So it was a descriptive name at one time, but it doesn't.
Yep.
No, that's like
So-
a classic newbie question,
Yeah,
sorry.
that's
that
right.
we
No, it's
didn't
okay.
answer that for
Right.
you.
Mike, can
Can
you go back a slide?
Yep.
So it's actually a great question, Terry. So if you see the differences, these variances,
It's actually the first page in your book, too.
Oh, okay.
so
The slide.
the difference here, this $53,000 number, right? So the number that we used, it was almost exactly a year ago. I can't see this.
5.254.
5254.
Okay.
So that was the number that was presented on the preliminary FY21 cherry sheet that was
Okay.
released in January of 2020.
Okay.
So that's the number that we typically use for these discussions,
Okay. I
right?
heard you say that part earlier, but I
Yeah.
wasn't sure. Okay.
And then this number,
5201.
5201, which is $53,000 less, that's the final cherry sheet for FY21, that because of COVID, the budget wasn't approved until December. So I thought it was best to use that number in the absence of an FY22 preliminary cherry sheet.
Thank you.
When you were going over the, projected changes in assessment of the towns, given, the preliminary nature of some of the revenue numbers, and that this uses the net school spending as it was for FY21 and makes no attempt to adjust for increasing per student cost or lower students,
Right.
it would be advisable for the towns in their current budget planning to use a higher number of increased assessment than is shown here. Because it could end up there, given the revenue and the net school spending.
Right.
And it's easier to come down than to try to go up.
Right. I was hopeful, having thought this thing through, Costa, and read a bunch of articles, I actually found one indication that we would receive a preliminary cherry sheet by January 25th. That seems hopeful for me, and then I found another report that said by early February, which, kind of gave me some assurance that I would get what I needed to update their recommendation early enough in the process for both us and the towns to kind of do some things. But you're right.
The net school spending number that would really, impact, this. It's something, I've tracked on a per student basis in previous years. So if it increases at the rate it did in FY21, and given the smaller number of students, it makes a big difference in towns' assessment. So I'm going to be telling the town administrator when he's putting his budget together to use a number much higher than 3%.
5?
Not that high. In the middle, 4%.
So let's take a quick look at the major categories of the increase in expenditures. So the way this schedule is set up is kind of expense category, biggest expense category to smallest expense category, kind of in. So salaries is obviously where we spend the majority of our money. So that's the top line, and so on and so forth. So we'll spend most of our time tonight talking about that first line item, which represents roughly 60% of our budget. So salaries, you can see that we're recommending an increase of $112,862, or 0.5%. As you can anticipate from my earlier comments and Mike's earlier comments, we're proposing pretty significant reductions in our staffing. So I'll breeze through this schedule. We'll come back to it several times over the next several weeks and drill down on most of these categories to discuss the drivers. At the next meeting, we'll have Phil and Pete here to talk about, in more detail, and Mike's going to talk about the salary, the staffing reductions, and then we're going to have Patty here to talk about the out-of-district tuitions and related transportation costs. So that's the agenda for the next meeting, and those represent the most significant cost increase items. So you can see that salaries, $112,000, insurance benefits, a little over $24,000, and basically what's happening there is, as I mentioned in the assumption schedule, I've incorporated a 2.5% increase in premiums, but we're reducing headcount and related costs, so that kind of drives it downward.
Yeah, and is the 2.5 based on any feedback that you've gotten?
Yeah, I had kind of a general conversation with our provider and used it as a placeholder. Okay. So I think last year we ended up at, what was it, 2.32% or something like that. I'm actually hopeful that it's even lower than 2.5%, given the fact that elective procedures and all those kinds of things have been significantly reduced this year. So out-of-district tuition costs up $174,000. The primary driver there, and I won't steal Patty's thunder, but the primary driver there is we've got 10 students coming up from the elementary level that are in out-of-district placements. We're recommending a modest decrease to our maintenance budget Our retirement contribution is up a little shy of $84,000 or 7.6%. And that, again, that's the Essex Retirement Board appropriation. It's a fixed cost. There's really nothing we can do about that. Transportation, regular ed, this is year 2 of our contract. And that's the increase that was built into our contract for year 2. Special ed.
On the retirement, are we able to pay that all up front, or do we need to pay it over the course of the year?
So we can do either or. I always like to pay it in that first month because we save like 25 grand.
Yeah. So, does our cash flow allow us to do that?
It does allow us to do that. So the number that I always reflect in a budget recommendation is the lower number, which is pay in full at the very beginning of the year versus pay in quarterly installments over the course of the year, which is a significantly higher expense. If our cash flow didn't allow us to do that, we wouldn't do it, but it does. So it's a pretty substantial savings. Transportation special ed up significantly, as you can see. The majority of it has to do with those 10 placements coming up from the elementary level, and then there's some additional expenditures related to COVID-related transportation protocol with our smaller special ed transportation providers that are driving up the costs as well. Primarily where we've had to add a run or two to the same location because the number of kids that have traditionally been on the bus is too dense. It doesn't allow for social distancing. MIS.
So for next year, you're planning for social distancing in the,
only here.
only in the
Only in the
special ed
transportation. As you'll see in a couple of slides, after we drill down into
Okay, I'll wait for
I'm
that.
going to talk about some COVID considerations
Okay.
that aren't in the recommendation. But this is the only place where we've really embedded it because we don't think it's going to go away. The special ed
for that, especially for that population.
For that population.
for that specific population.
Okay.
And Jeff, they don't, because those buses are typically small, they don't just think about running a bigger bus rather than 2 smaller ones?
They don't have that type of equipment.
Yeah, they don't do that.
So usually it's that like 8-passenger van, right, or smaller, and that's the equipment that most of them have purchased pre-pandemic.
Right. And so when you have a student and a monitor and a driver, you're already crowding that bus.
Right, that is like almost half of our budget increase. I guess a third, but.
Yeah, so when you package the out-of-district tuition,
Yeah.
the special ed transportation, and the student services consultants, that makes a very meaningful part of our budget recommendation. And most of those costs are fixed. That's why it's first on the agenda at the next meeting, for us to kind of drill down into.
And mandated, right? Like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, mandated.
Yeah, these are IEP services.
Yep.
MIS and instructional technology up $66,000. So there's 2 things kind of driving that. The first 2/3 of it is new technologies that we've purchased this year to support kind of the new learning platform. Things like Edpuzzle and Equatio and Wii Video and those kinds of things. All of that in the current year has been covered by our grants, and in FY22 is going to be covered by our grants. So these numbers are before offsets, and those grants are offsets. We'll talk about that more in the future, but so we've set aside even some of the money in the ESSER number 2 grant that is this next round of stimulus money. We're going to use $44,000 of that to continue with this specialized technology because it's been really embraced. And you'll hear about that at the budget subcommittee on February 10th, I'm sure.
So that number is before offsets?
This is,
Yeah,
this is all before
1.1 is
offsets.
before offsets.
Right. Athletics, very modest increase of a little over $4,000, and that's almost entirely attributable to a contractual increase in our transportation costs, a little over 3% transportation costs. Student services, increasing consultants and service providers as required by IEPs. And Patty will talk specifically about the categories where those increases fall. School choice and charter school sending tuition. This is one of those expense categories, Terry, that's on the cherry sheet.
Okay.
So there's really not too much I can do about that, other than making sure that the students that show up on those reports appear to be correct.
Okay.
So are we assuming an increase in number of students in FY '22 to account for the increase?
I'm assuming in this recommendation, I'm assuming exactly what they assumed in the FY21 final. If that changes in the FY22 preliminary, either up or down, I'll reflect whatever the cherry sheet reflects.
And our budget was the preliminary number.
Correct.
Okay.
Which was significantly less.
Yeah.
Property liability and workman's compensation insurance, I've reflected a modest increase in each of those based on discussions with our agent. And unemployment costs, you see a pretty sharp increase there, and those are directly attributable to the staffing plan reductions that we're proposing, the 7.6 FTE. So at that point, this point, that's kind of an overview of where the pluses and minuses are. Mike's going to talk about the staffing plan changes.
Right, so as I said, when we looked at the level service budget, it was about $500,000 higher than what we were really comfortable with as we looked at it. So, the leadership team got together, talked about methodology, looking at enrollment patterns and trends that we see coming forward, and came up with these recommendations, based on that methodology. And as Jeff said, we're going to have Phil and Pete present at our next meeting to really the specifics behind, why we're looking at these actual positions. But what we're looking at here, just to kind of go through them, is in the middle school would be a one-team reduction. And so that would be one math teacher, one science teacher, one social studies teacher, and one English teacher, and a paraprofessional that's associated with that team. At the middle high school, it's the 0.6 performing arts teacher position. And then at the high school, it's a 1.0 art teacher position and a 1.0 science teacher position. When you total all of these up, and again, that's the little asterisk down at the bottom, talks about this is net of unemployment insurance expenses and the district's share of health and dental insurance premiums where they are appropriate. The whole reduction from these recommended positions is $543,163.
So in the middle school, is that all in one grade or spread between 7th and 8th?
It'd be, I believe, and Phil's going to talk to this specifically next time around. I think we're talking about one 7th grade team. Phil, is that?
We haven't actually decided how we're going to break the teams up for next year, but it would be the equivalent to one team, and then Mike and I will discuss further how we balance out the teams from there between the 7th and the 8th grade.
I had assumed that it would be in the 7th grade, since the 6th grade coming up is significantly smaller than the 7th grade moving to 8th.
Yeah, we have to talk it through though. There's other ways to run a split team, 7/8 as well. It's another option. Yeah.
Is the reason for the reduction because of student enrollment, or solely for money?
I mean, primarily the driver of this is finances. You know, if both towns came in, if 3 towns came in and said, we'll give you a blank check, I don't know if I'd be recommending this level of reduction. But, you know, given, you know, we pushed as hard as we could to get towards that 3% number. Trying to remember what the 1.5 actually translated into a percentage number.
A little over 1.5.
Yeah. So that was a 4.5% increase. So
I know that when we had to do our last reduction in force with teachers, like last year was no teachers, right? It was
There were 2
there were
actually.
2
I'm sorry,
teaching
that
positions.
were
One was in
retired.
guidance. And
Through attrition.
through attrition.
Right.
Okay, I think that's why I
Through
remember
attrition.
it as no
Yeah.
teachers. But the last time we did something, I would say, of this significance, it was 5 positions, I think, and it was primarily at the high school level. It was due to enrollment, and we did look at the middle school, which remained essentially untouched because of the 3-team model. You know, you can't like just cut a math teacher without throwing the whole thing off.
Right.
So, but we saw that with enrollment coming up, that we were getting close to a 2-team model making more sense. So,
And we touched
Is
on
that
that
what this-
point last year.
right,
Yeah.
okay, so you
And
saw
then
it then.
yes.
So is that, I'm just wondering, like, to your point about, I understand there are some cuts in here that you don't want to make, but my understanding was we were headed towards a middle school adjustment regardless of the economic circumstances. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, so it's, we heard this same kind of, you know, account of how things played out a couple of years ago where there
Yeah.
was a reduction in the high school, and the decision was made not to reduce the middle school because the current 8th grade is actually well up over 300. And so it didn't make sense to reduce and then go back, have to go back up again for a year. You know, and so, as I said, we took a methodology, we looked at our upcoming numbers, and, you know, this made, you know, in a bad situation, the most sense to do.
So do you still think there's potential for like a big middle school thing to come up and like population, I should say?
Right now, the
To
numbers,
make us need these teachers
the
in a couple
numbers
years?
don't seem to support that.
Yeah, we looked at, you know, and those were, some of these reports are in the, we looked at, you know, the current 6th grade,
Yeah.
5th grade, 4th grade.
The grid.
third-
Yeah.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
you know,
Is
I
that
think
in
we
there?
all came to the conclusion that, you know, if we had to do it, for those 2 reasons, then it would be something that would be supported by enrollment for the next several years, based on the figures that we have.
I mean, I guess my point is this is a very hard cut to do, and we have excellent teachers, and we want to keep them, and we don't like to see class sizes go up. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to adjust when enrollment changes. So I'm just trying to understand the balance between those 2.
Yeah, there is a balance. You know, my opening comments, it's a balance of, you know, our responsibility to our member towns and to the students and faculty. And, you know, we felt, based on the combination of both factors, that this is something that we felt we, you know, had to do, given the unfortunate situation.
Yeah, right now in the 3 elementaries, every grade from 6 down to 1 is between 251 and 271.
Right.
So they're all on the smaller side.
I would just ask, I don't expect an answer to this tonight, but when we do have this discussion at the next meeting, when we go into this a little bit further, I'd really like some more clear information on what the way this will impact class sizes. I know, Carolyn, you just touched on that briefly, but I will want to very much know how that impacts class sizes.
And we'll provide that at both the middle school and the high school.
Oh,
Yeah, you can't see me over
No.
there. That's okay. And the cough wasn't actually, it was clear that my voice getting ready to speak. It wasn't a cough, and it wasn't like, hey, look at me. So these positions aren't really tied to a 7th grade, or like, let's just say it was a 6th grade teacher, just to take out Masco. If it was a 6th grade math teacher, is it actually a 6th grade math teacher that's going, or do things all get shuffled down the, like?
So there's a process that we have to go through when we reduce staff. That process is outlined in the collective bargaining agreement. In some cases, there's a seniority process.
Right.
And so if, we're saying, as you said, you use your example, a 6th grade math teacher, that if that 6th grade math teacher had seniority and the appropriate license to fill a position somewhere else in the district, actually the way the contract says, that person could move into that position. We also look at things like, do we have any openings that the person is qualified to fill? So that, the contract is designed to try to keep people, on staff. They just may not be in the same role. But also, eventually you do get to the point where a person does not have seniority and they don't have anywhere else to go.
And seniority comes from, I know, once you have professional status, and then is it years in the district?
Yes.
So if you were here 10 years, you have more seniority than someone who's here for 5. Like, it's simple math.
Yeah, it's that big, but there's also categories within there. So there are, like, I think it's years 3 through 6 is one group, and then 7 through 10 is another group.
Okay.
So the way the contract isn't just a straight, someone was hired before somebody else.
What made this particularly challenging for us was the fact that we haven't received any retirement notices yet for next year. None. No teachers. So the first kind of that first step outlined in the teacher contract and the teacher contract is through attrition. There is none that we know of yet, right? There is one position that is vacant to soon be filled by a long-term sub for the balance of the year, and if we can, we'll use a slot like that to reassign a person if they have the appropriate licensure and certification. So it's kind of like a snowball.
That's I guess there is shuffling that goes on.
There is a ton of shuffling.
Yeah, there's a chain reaction.
Bill?
Yeah, could you explain to me without necessarily going into all the detail, what would account for the big variation in the cost associated with these, the middle school, reduction of a one FT math teacher is $54K, and then the English teacher is $111. What drives that variance?
Two things. If you think about our salary, the teacher's salary schedule, it's years of service and degree. So on the higher numbers are teachers with more experience and higher degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And the teachers with lower salaries on this schedule are teachers with less experience with not as much education.
But
So I think you're saying here, like, there's a math teacher who doesn't have as much years of experience, and the English teachers have been around for longer.
Correct. Yeah, in some cases we're talking about people here on this list who have 9 to 10 years of experience in the district, and they're the least senior person in
that department.
Believe it or not.
right, but with the obviously the English teacher position sounds like someone who's been around a while. But I thought I just heard you say that when you do this, you've got to, go through the steps outlined in the CBA. So would you actually be reducing that person if they end up going someplace else because of their seniority?
So basically what we've done is we've looked at kind of a snapshot of our staffing model as of today.
Right.
And looked at all the factors. And these are the folks that would be impacted as of today. So
Okay.
we looked at seniority as it related to,
Okay.
the entire district and where people could get slotted into or bumped, where they have seniority or where they don't have seniority, where some folks don't have professional status yet. And we factored those things into this.
Okay.
You've done the shuffling.
We
did it.
Okay.
It might not be perfect, but
No.
we did
We
the
carried,
shuffle.
we carried it through
It
because
just
we have to know
jumped out
what,
at
we
me.
have to know
Strange,
what we
Bill,
would
isn't it?
realize
Yeah.
in actual dollars.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
because there's a big difference, like you
Right.
said, if you
Yeah.
don't work it all the way through.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? So these numbers, there's a footnote at the bottom that says, does that mean they include like the health insurance and other costs associated with the employee?
Yeah, so what I did was we did the shuffle.
Yeah.
We identified the person. We identified their salary for next year. Then I identified whether they had.
Family coverage?
Health
Yep,
insurance.
yeah.
Yep.
And then kind of identify that as potential savings and then assume that there would be an unemployment cost associated with each person.
I mean, is it like, so, I mean, really, I understand that's in there kind of obscuring the numbers, but is it safe to say some teachers make twice as much as other teachers?
Very safe to say. In fact, it's very accurate on that list.
Okay. Interesting. Melissa?
When we have the presentation at the next meeting, talking about these proposed staffing reductions, can we get the enrollment data that you've used and stuff?
It's actually,
It's right in your book.
it's in your book.
If you go to,
No, there's not.
10 pages in? 9 or
not
10
that
pages?
sophisticated.
I meant that, I'm looking really for the breakdown.
The enrollment distribution by grade goes with the October 20
Sticky fingers, sorry.
figures and
Get it. It's much easier to read yours than the NASDAQ stuff, so.
Is that it, Melissa?
That's it. What else?
In terms of retirement, I know you can't know because they don't, like, when people declare. I guess I'm just wondering, is it typical that you can begin to anticipate some in advance?
so the contract actually says that they need to let us know by the 30th of this month,
The end
correct?
of this month.
Right. Because in order
The
to
question
get,
was about retirements, if you guys can't hear down there.
do we anticipate, so the CBA, in order to get the end of career benefit that's outlined in the contract, the person, in order to get that benefit on July 1st, the teacher would need to let us know by the end of this month whether they're retiring or not. As of today, we don't have any.
Does that mean if they told you February 28th that they would get it in August? Or
They
that
won't get
don't
it, they won't get it for a full year.
They would get it July 2022.
Okay.
So they're not foregoing the benefit, they're just foregoing the almost immediate payment of it.
Okay.
So a bit of a deterrent, Micah, but I don't see it as a kind of a showstopper for me. But I don't know if I'm going to retire.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you by the end of January. I'm going to hold on, you know. And this year's anything but the ordinary.
But normal.
Right, so, but when it comes to the budget, I only incorporate the things I know, right? So I haven't incorporated any assumptions around any retirements because
We just don't know.
he doesn't have the piece of paper in his hand.
But if you did that, you'd also have to add the end of career benefit.
Exactly.
That too, right.
So are we anticipating that people may be making a decision on retirement, whether depending on the status of what happens with the I just know
I don't
from
know.
family members or, what I've heard from other districts that people are waiting to make a decision to see.
It could,
I would say yes. We've also heard that there's a bill that is likely to be introduced this spring, where MTA members can buy either up to 5 years of credible service or something else. I haven't actually read it yet, but that could lend itself to folks retiring early as well.
Oh, to try and get people, to encourage people?
Yeah, to encourage earlier retirement. But again, it's, we have to see how that works its way through the legislature. There's definitely an impact on the master teachers retirement system. I don't know what they would say to that. We just don't know.
And how would that work if you've heard like somebody who's retiring in whenever? Would you add it back, like, could you add back in a position at that point, or is it, if it's not January 31st?
So let's say it happens before you approve the budget and before it goes to town meeting. Yeah, we would adjust the salary. Right, so take out the expensive teacher, replace it with an M5, let's say. That's significant savings.
The headcount reduction still exists.
The
It's just
headcount
the
reductions.
dollar amount that
Right.
we can contemplate. Okay.
Well, and the fact that it's somebody who is.
I understand that. No, but just as far as like a chart with us reducing staffing by this many roles, the number of roles stays the same regardless of whether it's through attrition, retirement, or a RIF, right?
Correct.
You would just feel better, or I would feel better. because
Right,
I'll
we would feel better that
if somebody chose to leave.
right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that someone would not be laid off, because if the retirement is in a field that people that are being laid off are not qualified to teach in, they can't take one of those, that retirement job.
And you are still talking about like class size and all that, so it doesn't, as far as the structure of the school, it is important to understand the roles that are being reduced, and I totally understand that we prefer to do it any other way besides a RIF. Okay.
So the shuffle can get really complicated, Tasha.
Yeah.
In that May, June, July timeframe, when people announce retirements, and we've already taken action, right, on letting people know, not extending people that don't have professional status because there's a statutory deadline for those kinds of things. So it can get tricky for us.
And there are provisions in the contract to recall people, but at some point they need to do what's in their own best interest and try and make sure that they've got something sure for September. So that's always a risk in all of this too.
Is this the first that the teachers would have heard of this?
No.
No. So this has been more and more, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, I guess warned by discussions to the union head, or?
No, personally.
Both. Both.
Yeah.
And qualified that this is a proposal.
Right.
At the end of the day, the committee.
Right. The committee has to make a final decision on this ultimately.
Right. But we didn't fit. We felt very strongly that folks needed to hear before
this.
Yeah, I fully support that. Thank you for doing that.
And it includes the union.
I think I'm sorry, I may have not been able to hear you.
Tasha asked, is this the first the teachers would have heard of this?
Oh,
and they
okay.
said, no, they've been given a heads up. Right.
The teachers as a whole or individuals?
Both.
Individual
Individuals.
teachers and union leadership.
Okay. But they understand that today is just the preliminary.
That's what I just said.
He also
That's what we just said.
Thank
This
you.
is
My
preliminary.
brain is processing, I'm in
Preliminary.
processing mode.
If you don't hear this part, it's
Apologize.
hard to follow.
These make it hard.
I don't.
They do.
I also don't want to process any of it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we
that'd
didn't
be
want to
part of
present
my-
it,
It's not enjoyable.
but. So if we're okay for now, we'll keep moving through the presentation. So this is, I felt compelled to acknowledge the fact that this has been the year of unknowns, and we're likely going to have some unknowns kind of hit us in the face for the rest of the year and then next year. So I wanted to identify some things that are not what I call COVID considerations, right? So things not included in this budget recommendation, but could be a reality next year. I don't know.
Like things that we're doing currently.
Kinda, yeah. That might need to be around next year that I didn't factor into the recommendation. So the first is, we've got an army of people down in the field house, right?
Cleaning up after the
Cleaning
two
and
kids that are there.
sanitizing, right. It's a pretty clean.
Those
place.
desks are clean.
I think it's
But,
probably the
people
cleanest place
We're
in
gonna
town.
do PSATs there on Tuesday, and people were asking about cleaning. Those desks are
You don't need to
clean.
be worried. Anyway, so if we were to continue that same approach, that would be represented in the first two lines, right? So part-time cafeteria cleaning staff would run us about $108,000 for the year. And then the two additional full-time day porter cleaning staff would run us a little less than $80,000. We had a tent for 3 months in the fall. If we wanted to have a tent for 5 months next year, it would run us about $75,000. High school graduation, tent, chairs, stage, etc. for June 2022. If we ever had to do a COVID-like graduation in 2022, God help us, that would run around $40,000.
If you got a tent for it.
Right, exactly. We did a pretty extensive indoor air quality study. If the committee were to want us to refresh that study in the kind of same scope and magnitude, that would run us around $40,000. And then I've got some placeholders for like COVID cleaning. I've got 5 whole building cleanings at a little over $17,000. Are we going to need to COVID clean the buses for 180 days? If we do, that's going to run us around $28,000. And then I'm feeling pretty good about PPE and cleaning supplies and nursing supplies. We really took advantage of the CVRF grant and the grants, the sub-recipient grants from Boxford and Middleton. And we've got, walk by the large calf, it's unbelievable. But we've got a lot of stuff stocked up. I don't know if there's going to be anything else that we need to do. So I threw a placeholder in there for $50,000. If we had to, if COVID's still around, we'll have to refresh our signage. As you've seen, there's an overabundance of it. That won't last for 2 or 3 years, so we're going to have to do some refresh. We spent almost $75,000 on signage, believe it or not, in preparation for the October opening. So I anticipate I'll have to refresh some of that stuff. And then a big unknown around COVID testing for students and staff. I didn't even try to come up with a number for that.
Is that something that's being considered to put as an expense on schools?
It is.
It is.
It is.
Desi.
Oh.
So there's without going into too much detail, there's I'll call it a pilot, a potential pilot for it, where the state will cover some expenditures for the first 4 to 6 weeks of the pilot, 6 weeks of the pilot, and then it's all on you. And I have no idea how much that will cost.
Right.
And that would be for September, since this is the budget that we're talking about.
We just,
This
I think,
would be
I think
for
what
September.
Jeff's saying is, we just don't know where we're gonna be relative to COVID in September, and we may be having to do some or all of these things in September. We just don't know.
Yeah, it's a possibility, but if the vaccination program is working, then that might mitigate
Right.
having to do this. If it's not working and it still need to do some of these things, there will hopefully be some money trickling down from
Right.
higher up to cover some of it.
I mean, I just felt an obligation to throw this stuff out there, just so
Sure.
we all could be thinking about it, right?
And so this number is not baked into that final budget recommendation either.
I mean, 9 months ago, I never imagined we'd be having this conversation, so, you know, I just thought it would be an egregious kind of hole if I didn't throw something in there.
I mean, the other thing, like if we are in that scenario, obviously we got to rethink like everything. If we hardly have kids coming into the school, then maybe you scrap having kids come into school and you totally invest in software. I'm just throwing out something.
Yeah.
So we
Could
may
be.
do
It's all
something,
right.
we have no idea.
We have no
what
idea.
we would do.
To Jeff's point,
Okay.
go back to March 1st, or March 11th, when we passed a budget and thought everything was great, and 2 days later, the floor dropped out.
Oh, we were worried
We just
about
don't know.
Kids that were away on, or going away on
Yeah.
field trips.
Right?
Yep.
It seems like a lifetime.
Yeah.
Oh, the
That
good old
that was
days.
the biggest dilemma.
Just to be clear, you guys are not planning on any of those scenarios, right? With this budget, you're planning on in person. I just want to make sure.
That's
Sometimes
that's,
people
we're
are
planning-
talking
that
about
is our
it.
plan right now,
Back
is
to
that,
normal.
is that, you know,
Right.
hopefully.
And that's why this stuff wasn't included, but I felt
Yeah.
compelled to share it
That
out.
hopefully the, vaccine rollout goes, as planned or better, and we've got, a critical mass of people who have been vaccinated by August, and we're ready to go in September, everybody back. That's
So the other,
what
just
we're
to call it, be fully transparent, the other thing that's not in our budget recommendation and not on this COVID consideration schedule is proctors and any other type of coverage for remote accommodations for teachers. Right? There's
Yeah.
there's none of that here. So
That could be in like this.
I had it and then I took it out, but that's not in our recommendation and it's not here for the reasons Mike just talked about. Okay, so the next slide. So at the next meeting, as I kind of already discussed, in the event that we I get my hands on the FY22 preliminary cherry sheets, I'll update the schedules and we'll do kind of a deep dive into revenue sources and expense offsets. If I don't have it before the 3rd, we'll do it at the next meeting. So that one's a little bit up in the air. But for sure at the next meeting, we'll spend a bunch of time on, a bunch more time on the proposed staff reductions. Phil and Pete will get into a lot more detail there. And then Patty will spend a significant amount of time on out-of-district tuitions, transportation, and those service providers as well. And then we'll have Mike talk about the requests that came through that process that I talked about earlier that were not included in the recommendation. We did that last year and the committee seemed to be embraced that information, so we'll do the same thing again this year.
I'll tell you why I like that is because it paints a picture of what the vision, what your hopes
Could have
and
been.
dreams are that,
Right.
dollar signs don't agree with, but that is what we want for the district. So I think it's helpful to hear those things.
I agree. And then the last slide is just kind of a recap of the calendar. We have a budget subcommittee meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, the 27th, and then our next regularly scheduled school committee meeting where we'll, again, continue to drill down into the recommendation is on February 3rd.
Oh, Terry?
But that's okay, you can go first, Terry.
Okay, I know that based on my mailbox and everyone's mailbox, that there are people who dialed in tonight to, in anticipation of wanting to hear us talk about athletics, cost for athletics, right? So I know there's gonna be a deep dive later, and I know there are budget subcommittee meetings, and I know that there have been already public discussions. Can you just tell me, just for my information, on your major category analysis, what's that $426,000? What does that cover? It doesn't, sorry.
Everything but salaries in the athletics budget. So if you went into the budget book
Okay,
and looked at the high school
okay,
and the chart of accounts within the high school,
okay,
there's a budget office for athletics.
okay,
That number would represent all the expenditures
okay.
in non-salary type accounts.
Oh,
Because the salary from every office is captured in the salary account
Right,
at the top of
okay.
that schedule. So it would include things like durables and consumables
Okay.
and
Transportation, sorry, I'm seeing it now.
You got it?
Because I'm thinking
Yep.
of the people who are listening to,
Yep.
if they haven't paid attention to those other, or haven't been able to go to those other meetings, or don't know, so it's admin, support staff.
nope,
No,
those are
sorry.
salaries.
Those are salaries, okay, sorry.
Right.
So it's stipends, salary,
Nope,
or is that?
correct, salaries.
Okay, so then consultants, those are,
Yep, those would be game officials.
okay, so are those staff or are those?
Yeah, so if you look at that whole section,
Yeah,
Tara,
sorry, so, yeah.
so the whole section there totals up to just under $1 million.
Okay,
And so what the 426, 426
yeah.
that's on this slide
Is the
are the
non-salary.
non-salary
Okay.
accounts in this group.
Okay.
Right.
So for like general information for the community, the amount of money that we're spending on athletics, including salaries and these other, that the budget is, it's about $1 million.
It's about $1 million.
Okay, that's what I was
That's
trying to
correct.
break
About
up.
$1 million, and then we collect fees.
Right, yeah, but so I
And that
know about
covers
that
about
part, yeah.
55%.
Okay. So we're investing $1 million a year in the athletic program
No,
as a community.
it's a net.
No, so we'll talk about offsets at the
Okay.
next meeting. It's
Okay.
kind of a weird concept, and this is your first budget cycle. So,
Yeah, okay,
yeah, so we budget for the full cost of the athletic department.
yeah,
And then we collect
And then you
user
collect. Okay,
fees.
right,
And we
right, okay.
offset,
okay, got it,
Yeah.
okay.
But we are spending $1 million.
we're spending.
spending $1
You
million.
use the
and then
word
we-
invest, and I think that's
Yeah.
why I said no, because it is
We spend $1 million, but then
significantly
we take
funded
in,
by the fees.
we take in
Correct.
55% in fees to
That's what,
offset
okay,
that.
so this represents, this is the inclusive of the fees. Or like, the
No.
fees partially covered this.
Later in
Yeah,
another
that piece,
part of the
that
budget.
sheet.
All right, yeah,
But I think the simple message is that the fees that we collect cover a portion of what we spend on athletics.
Right.
And
So
the, and,
55%.
right, and the balance is borne by the taxpayers across the three towns.
okay, thank you, that's kind of, I mean, I kind of knew that, but I just wasn't sure how to, what it parts all the numbers.
If you look at the next to last page, that's the athletic cost of athletics,
Okay.
that's the $1 million, $53,507 has cost to run the program.
Okay,
And then, the money that's collected is from the, people that
The
participate.
people who, right, yes, yes,
The estimate, when the fee was set was based on the 3-year average participation per sport.
yeah,
So in a particular year, that money coming in might be higher or lower because the participation is higher or
Yeah.
lower than the average.
okay.
And that
So
sometimes.
the fees are set according to a schedule that is standard, but the actual cost might.
So and those fees are collected and put it into a revolving account.
Yeah.
From which that transfer is made to offset the operating budget.
Okay,
And because, there's a variable in the amount collected based on participation, the
Yeah.
balance of that account might go up or down.
got it, okay,
And other than the transfer, that fund has also, been used to fund some athletic improvements.
okay. Got it, thank you, that's helpful to me, and
It's it's a little
Yeah, I just
complicated.
thought it might be
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be any less complicated if in the revolving fund were all the expenses as well as the fees collected, and then we just have a transfer from the operating budget to that.
6 of one, half a dozen of another.
I know, but with people looking at it from the outside on a casual basis, would they be able to better understand what is happening? The net difference, there is no
Right,
difference.
there's no difference.
What was your idea? Say it again?
Take the revolving account,
Yeah,
collects all the fees.
yeah.
The operating budget transfers about $500,000, into that, and all the expenses, that $1 million, 57,500, are paid from that revolving account.
And not go, puts money into the account.
Instead of taking fees out to fund the operating budget puts money
Funds the
into that.
program.
Net effect is zero financially, but it might help people see it more clearly.
It's, I mean, it's an interesting idea because at least I think I've heard that there's a perception that the school is somehow siphoning or money out of the athletic programs and using it for other purposes, which is patently not true. But that's an interesting idea that might make it clearer. I mean, it is the same thing. We're spending $1 million, we're taking in certain portion to cover it in fees, and the taxpayers are picking up the rest. But it might be a way of better explaining it. I mean, quite honestly, I'm not sure that it's going to make the issue completely go away, because generally, the reality is the fees are still high. So I'm not sure we're in a position to do anything about that, but it's certainly something for us to talk about when, as we move through this process.
Well, the cost is real, right? It's like, that's how much it costs to run these programs. And either individuals pay to participate. Well, right now, it's hybrid.
It's shared.
So either everybody pays, or everybody pays a portion, and the participants
Right,
pay.
we can decide
Yeah.
to adjust that percentage. I mean, we could say that families pay a maximum of 30%. And the district, through the taxpayers, pay the rest of it.
Then we have to,
But,
That would turn out,
that
that would turn out to be an
requires,
increase in this.
no,
bottom
I
line.
know that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that
part I get, yeah.
there has to be support
Right, I'm
to
just
do
trying
that.
to see about, how to open up the conversation.
So, it could make it easier for families to afford to put their kids, in sports, and, less of a hardship on them.
Yeah.
But then you're increasing the hardship on the person that may be struggling to stay in their home.
Yeah.
So,
Well, if you're having.
it's not an easy choice, because you are imposing hardship on one person or the other.
We have to take it out of, I mean, if we need more money for that, it's gotta either, the taxpayers have to know about it.
Right, they need to be,
Yeah.
they need to be engaged in
Yeah.
this conversation, and quite frankly, I don't think we only got to this point many years ago when there was real budgetary pressure, and the school district, had to start sharing it and charging fees, otherwise the programs would be in jeopardy. So if there is community support, and it would have to be widespread community support in the demonstrated by passing budgets that would be larger,
Right.
in our towns, then so be it. But let's have that conversation.
Right, okay, that's.
Because I think everyone agrees that these, the sports and the extracurriculars, all that stuff is really, really important part
Right.
of.
But our responsibility is to me, the basics, like.
All right, you guys, we
Yeah.
have discussed this
Okay. Yeah,
pretty
yeah. Okay.
significantly at the budget
Okay, all right. Okay.
committee. And no, I appreciate you saying it because we have listeners that listen to this meeting that didn't attend that
Yeah,
meeting.
I just think it would
And
be a shame if we
some of
left
the,
this meeting without having talked about
right,
that.
and
Yeah.
there's inaccurate information on
Right.
Facebook, so
That's what
I
I
don't
am
mind spending a
trying
little
to-
time on it, but I
Yeah,
do
okay.
think we should move on.
Okay.
Can I
thank
just
you.
ask one question about something Costa said that wasn't about applicant?
One second, Tasha, did you? Oh, are you going
Yeah, it's
to? Are
gonna,
we planning on doing it later?
yeah,
Okay, are you okay if we do the,
I don't have to, but they're talking.
well, you're going to do it anyway. All right,
Our presentation for tonight is complete.
done.
okay.
So you guys can,
All right, so Zilly is,
Back to you.
okay, Zilly's proposing giving a budget subcommittee update, which does cover athletic fees, and just pulling it
Okay.
up now since we're talking about it. So I think that's a good idea. Tasha, did you want to ask your question of Costa first?
Yeah. Well,
Oh, and
it-
Melissa might have a question too. Okay, go ahead, Tasha. And then
So
Melissa.
it's just kind of pointing out something that Costa said, which I wanted to clarify. So you talked about when there's money left in the revolving account and how that goes to general, I wanted to make sure that I was getting this correct because I think it's important. Like if there's money left over, like that's what we've used to resurface tennis courts with, right? I think every, whatever piece of, not equipment, but whatever facilities that we have that are sports related that get their annual maintenance or, you know, every decade maintenance or whatever it may be, that is funded from there, right? So that I'm not sure if that's in the actual sports fee where you put in like however much per year to take care of the tennis courts, or if that just comes when you need it and that's where it comes from.
so I've been here a little less than 2 years.
I know that.
And nothing's been used out of that account
Yeah, I know tennis was done
to
just
do
before you guys.
anything, but, you know, kind of conceptually, that's
Yeah.
how that account is traditionally used in other districts. But in my time here,
Nothing's
not a
done.
dime has been taken out of that account.
Right, but I remember when we re-looked at things a couple of years ago, the tennis courts, were like a disaster and they needed to be done at that point, so.
The amount of money going from the athletic revolving account to fund the athletic costs in the operating budget, that transfer has stayed the same for a large number of years. So it's not, we're not,
As has the balance.
so we're not taking money out of there, willy-nilly. It's the same. And what's left over, if it gets a little higher than, because in a revolving account, you never know what you're gonna get in, so you gotta keep some balance. But if it gets a little higher than, you're comfortable with, then you can take up some money and resurface the tennis courts or do some other project that is not normally included in
the athletic.
this spreadsheet.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to point that out. Thanks.
Melissa, did you have a question on the budget or?
I think it's part of the bigger budget conversation that
Okay.
we're having. It has nothing to do with athletic.
No, but let's
Don't be
finish that one
disappointed.
first.
So I am just curious if when we're talking, I guess at the February 3rd meeting, about proposed staff reductions, etc., and Patty's going to present, but are we ever going to talk about what our anticipated educational needs are for our students and whether or not they have or could have costs? And I know that you've done your budget analysis, but with everything so unknown, and Patty gave her student services update, which to me was very sobering, about just the needs of all of our students, not just special ed students, but our general ed students. Phil talked about how much stress our students are under. And I'm just concerned that some of our decisions financially can affect how we're dealing with the whole child. And I just would love some kind of presentation or at least to touch on that topic about what we anticipate our children needing after a year and a half of a pandemic and how that affects what we're doing here, just so that we just need to look at the whole picture. that's just my comment and my wish that we have that conversation as part of the budget process.
Absolutely.
The other thing to talk about is not only doing the same things as we're doing, is we should always be looking at, can we do something differently that's better, for the educational environment for the kids. And doing it differently doesn't always mean it's more expensive. Sometimes it might be less expensive. The goal should be, to get the, keep improving the education by always looking at and examining what we're learning about how to deliver that service. And this year, I think it's a great example. We've had to adjust how the delivery of service goes. There are some things that we've learned, like the schedule and the wind block, that you want to incorporate in other things about the delivery of education. And what does that mean for costs for staffing? Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but if we're always asking that question, we can always try to be improving without necessarily increasing the cost.
Yeah, no, I just think it's an important conversation for us to have, especially in a post-pandemic world. And
absolutely.
How is what we're doing now affecting our students in 6 months? And is it even anything we can anticipate? So that's just my comment about the budget process this year.
I look back fondly to 2 summers ago when we started talking about how we're going to change education. Yeah. Back in those simple days, when that's all we wanted to do.
We changed it all right.
So just to pull it back to Melissa's question, I know that we have planned as part of the budget subcommittee to have meetings with department heads. Zilly, can you talk to that just a bit?
Yeah.
We'll just talk. Let's bleed your update out.
So at our last budget subcommittee meeting, a couple of meetings ago, we talked about how we'd like to hear from our department heads and other budget holders that might not be called department heads, but hold a budget for their department. And so at the last meeting, we came up with questions, some of which are the things you just talked about for them. And Mike I sent them to Mike and he's passing them through. And we will be hearing from them at our February 10th meeting, which will begin at 6 o'clock so that we don't keep them too late on a school night. It's not going to be as long as updates of the past where there was a time, Terry, for a few years where there were long presentations. It was almost like an annual report, but we'd like to incorporate more of that into our regular meetings here. So for the budget subcommittee, this is more focused on exactly that kind of thing. What are some things that maybe, if you could have had a crystal ball and seen what this year looked like, you wished you had, that you now would like to keep using in education or in addressing the whole child at school, all those kinds of things. So
thank you.
we will be hearing from them. Everyone's encouraged to attend. I'll probably post it as a full committee meeting so that everybody can come and have the flexibility to engage. And that's that part of my update.
Okay. I think it's great. Now I'm also wondering, when we have Phil and Pete talking about staffing, if they can also talk to Melissa's question. Would that work? So just hear from the principals and hear from the teachers, get everybody's perspective. Okay. All right. Great. Do we have any other, I know there are actually probably a lot of budget questions, but tonight was intended to be an overview so we can sit and go home and think about it and be prepared for our next meetings. But is there anything else that anyone wants to ask tonight about the budget before Zilly gives her budget sub update? Okay. Thank you, Jeff and Mike. Appreciate the update. Didn't like the answer.
We don't either.
Zilly.
You were asking a question. I was looking at my notes and I didn't get to answer. I don't have a question, but I have one comment.
Oh,
I
yeah.
just asked, sorry. I made some notes ahead. And my comment is that as I'm processing all of this, one thing I want to keep in mind is that a lot of this is in order to meet the expectations of the member towns, which is a great thing to do for mutual respect. At the same time, I want to remember that last year we made some decisions that some of us may or may not regret, in that sort of mindset of trying to meet them partway. I think even the towns may have felt the impact of losing the health director position last year. So I'm going to definitely weigh all of this very heavily with that kind of mindset of keeping a balance of what is best for our students in our district, balanced with what the 3-member towns and taxpayers expect and need. So just wanted to mention that perspective. All right, do you want me to get my update now?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we're going out of order on the budget, on the subcommittee updates, but I'll just finish with budget. So part of the discussion, one of our agenda items was talking about our invitation to the department heads and budget holders. A lot of the meeting was also to talk about athletic fees. So what I want to let everyone know is that the athletic fees is reviewed as part of the annual budget process every year. And that every few years we look at the fee schedule and see if any adjustments need to be made. This was not supposed to be one of those years, but there has been a lot of parent concern that was brought to me as the chair of the subcommittee. So between subcommittee meetings, I met with about 10 parents, representative parent group, to gather their input. I was going to list their names, but I didn't write them down. I don't want to leave anybody out. I'll mention a few that were the most vocal, which were Darcia Tremblay, Danielle Zenas, Jason Clark, Keith Bavardi, Young. What's that? Oh, Scott Young. And then there were a few others that joined us on the first meeting and didn't return for the second meeting. But I got a lot of valuable feedback from them, and what I did is I took that and tried to summarize it in a digestible format. So at our January 13th meeting, I presented it, and that as slides, and that is linked in the agenda from that meeting, which is all posted on the website, as well as minutes from the previous meeting that explain a lot of the history that you guys were all just touching on.
Yeah, sorry, Zilly.
No. You don't need to apologize. The reason I'm sharing all this is because if there are people listening, if you go to the budget subcommittee page on the website, you can find a lot of answers to a lot of questions. There's some that aren't answered, but a lot is there. And there is a lot of inaccurate information being shared on social media about this topic. So I encourage you to look to the source and find out what's actually posted there.
Hey, Zilly?
Yes.
Just looking at the link takes you just to the subcommittee page. So where, just to be specific,
So
is
on
it
that
under the
subcommittee page,
minutes?
you'll find agendas and minutes so
Okay.
far. So the agendas will have links to things that we used during the meeting, and then the minutes obviously are the minutes. The minutes from the last meeting cannot be posted until they've been approved by committee at the next meeting. All right, so at that last conversation, we talked about options to consider to provide some relief to our student athletes. But in the understanding that we were having this presentation tonight of the overall FY22 budget recommendation, and understanding that great economic uncertainties that districts statewide are facing right now, and the context of the pandemic that we're all dealing with, the committee did not feel comfortable engaging in more involved, in-depth discussion of these possible solutions until after tonight's meeting, so that we would have that context to use. So we will be returning to the topic. Just for a quick overview, the things that we kind of brought up as options, we're looking at a multi-sport, multiplayer cap or family cap, considering adjusting the threshold or requirements for scholarships, and looking if there's any other options with it, of adjusting the budget in general to offer relief without increasing taxpayer contribution. And if it is something that does ever go to that, we definitely need to engage the entire population, not only athletic parents, in the conversation. That's my update.
All right.
It was a long one, but I think.
No, that actually was perfect. Thank you. Thanks. A lot. I appreciate all the discussion that and feedback you've received from the community and digested. All right, I'm going to go back to the item G, which is proposed amendments to the Masco Regional Agreement. This is something the Policy Subcommittee has been working on, and Melissa's going to take this topic.
So, for the past few months, Policy Subcommittee has been working on, I guess this is a cleanup year, so we've been working on cleaning up can I give my update at the beginning and then?
Oh, yeah, I'm assuming this is all the same thing. Yeah.
So
This is your one and only chance.
We've been working with MASC to update our policies. We've gone through one full section and I think like 3/4 of the next one. We're meeting monthly for 2 hours at a time with Dorothy Presser, and then Mike and Terry and I and Jackie, and just going through that. And then, so another thing that has come up on our, our agenda is cleaning up the district agreement. And this we started to talk about last year before the floor fell out. And we decided to take it up because we thought that particularly the apportionment portion of changes to the district agreements it's a good year to discuss the same. So we've had 2 meetings in which we invited representatives from the towns from our member towns, from Middleton, Topsail, and Boxford. I felt that the conversation was productive, and we came to a point at the last meeting that we are proposing changes, and in your agenda they're called proposed amendment changes, or proposed amendments to the Masco District Agreement. And the first several are just clean up some language that's in the agreement, to remove out-of-date things that refer to like 1969 amendments or dates, things like that. And then in the proposed 11th amendment would be the 11th amendment to the apportionment costs. And we have come to a conclusion, and our presentation is that beginning in fiscal 2023, we would like to begin with a average apportionment schedule. So in fiscal year 23, we'll do a 2-year average. In 24, we'll do a 3-year average. In 25, we'll do a 4-year average. And then beginning with fiscal year 2026, we will start our 5-year average. And the goal in this is to sort of, it's to lessen the curve of the bumps as enrollment goes up and down. And I think Topsfield is a really good example of
Very
year
bumpy.
to year. So we've had 2 big bumps up. And if we had started this average apportionment several years ago, it would have looked a lot smoother for some of our towns. And we believe this is going to allow our towns to forecast better and sort of allow our increases to be incorporated within the town budgets a little bit better. So that's the proposed 11th amendment. And then the proposed 12th amendment, and I'm not sure how this is going to go because we've gotten some feedback, but this was a request from Mike and Jeff that rather than, or currently each member town pays their apportionment in quarterly shares, and it's better for our district if it gets paid monthly. It appears that Middleton is the only town that said, yeah, that's fine, like sort of without any discussion. And Topsfield and Boxford appear to be reviewing it because the payment of our costs are tied to interest payments to the town. I think that, did I? So the money that they have like in their revolving, or it earns interest. Yeah. So if they pay it monthly, then there's a loss of that income, the interest income.
I think that, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think, at least from the Boxford perspective, the feedback the preliminary feedback is that if there's sort of a pressing reason why, from the district perspective, that we really need to move to that model, then they would be very happy to entertain that proposal. But if it's just like a convenience thing, then there is an impact on the town, so we prefer not to do it.
So we feel as a committee that the towns are definitely agreeable to changing the apportionment formula. But they would like us to agree as a committee and then make a presentation and formally present it. So I open it up for discussion, questions.
Yeah. When we started meeting with them, the draft amendment, had going to a 5-year average in FY '27. Just 1 year at a time until FY '27. John Erickson of the Middleton, FinCom suggested that it would create a smoother path by rolling into that average. I have put, using the actual past and the NASDAQ projections that, Mike has sent out, I've created this table of what it would look like for each town, the up and downs in percentage change if you're using 1 year at a time until FY '27 when you go to 5 and rolling into it. And I think if you look at it, any town would rather see the advantage in the rolling, average. I'm glad to share this with, anyone who wants it if they want to have, look at it and have, discussions with different people in town. So I'll just pass them around.
Now, that part isn't really being debated by the group that you went with, correct? It's more just about the payment.
Yeah, so I think what might get debated is the start time, the starting date, starting fiscal year for. And so we just picked 2023 because let's rip off the Band-Aid and just start doing it.
And, and if you look at, I purposely didn't put, names to any of which town is in which section of the chart, because, I want people, to look at it. And no matter what town are you from, are you going to be able to have a preference for one or the other? And I think, when I look at it, no matter what town I'm at, I'd rather do the rolling 5-year average.
So is the bottom line that representatives from the 3 towns, the FinComs or the Board of Selectmen, that they are in favor of recommending this change to roll into this rolling average?
That was the sense I received, yes.
Okay,
but they
fantastic.
didn't want to commit to it until they had a proposal.
Absolutely.
They didn't want to negotiate.
Sure.
They wanted to comment on a specific proposal.
Right, of course.
So in terms of getting payments over 12 months versus quarterly, the reason that is in our benefit is fill in the blank.
Yeah, so that's my understanding. So I think it was advised that there's cash flow, is it like September and March? Is that when it is?
No, I mean, the only month that I've witnessed, I had any concern, and it wasn't a off the charts level of concern, it was last May.
Okay.
So it would be a more predictable, if you divided it by, let's say 10, and it was equal installments beginning in July, hypothetically, it would be kind of a smoother contributions that were incredibly predictable, right? As opposed to the language that's in the regional agreement now says you got to pay by the end of September. Well, I don't know if you're going to give it to me in July or on September 30th, right? So I would like to see some predictability, more predictability in any revised language, as opposed to a lot of openness, which is in the current language, right? So it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it says pay a quarter by the end of September, pay a quarter by the end of December, pay a quarter by the end of March, right? So not knowing if we're going to get that check in August or at the first week of October, I don't love it.
Right, so you're looking for predictability. I'm just wondering, because it sounds like one town said fine, and the other two said kind of like why.
Well, for monthly.
Yeah.
But you're saying that you could also get away with a quarterly thing that is prescribed, you must pay in the first 2 weeks of September.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want it to be the last day of the quarter.
Yeah. Right, they said that, well, at least the Boxford representative, or no, I think it was the Topsfield, one of the Topsfield people said, if it's the dates of the quarterly payments that are a problem, we can shift that around. You can shift it, I don't know, like if you have a crunch on September 1st and the payment's due September 30th, then we could, that we could make the kind of adjustment that you're talking about, maybe narrow the window.
Yeah, so just to be clear,
Yeah.
this doesn't keep me up at night.
Okay.
So in fact, I haven't even thought about it since last May.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, when it kind of resolved itself, when we got a check,
Right.
Earlier than I was expecting, because it was, due by June 30th, and we got it in May, which was great. So,
one option would be to do it August 15th, November 15th, February 15th, May 15th, which is 15 days after
could
the
live
due
with
date
that.
of tax bills.
that would be great.
So those are
rational.
the times when the towns are getting in cash,
Yeah,
and then
that would be great.
I feel like
Let's do it.
we're gonna
Put
put
it in there.
enough on the towns, and so to have something where we're not asking questions.
Yeah.
would be good.
I'm just looking for, I'm sorry,
So that was August, November, February, May. That's what you just said.
yeah, so basically 15 days after the quarterly tax
Yeah, that's
Okay.
great.
bills are due.
Just go to your own bank account and see that money sucked out, and then you'll figure out the
Right,
day.
yeah. I don't want to touch on at a random time either, so. Okay.
so
Right, yeah.
now it just says on or before the dates indicated. So, yeah, I see the.
And the dates
And
indicated the last day of the quarter.
75, it was September 1st, December 1st, March 1st.
Yeah.
Oh wait, actually, never mind.
Could date back to 1959, if that.
Yeah, it does say
The calendar of
1973, so I
Yeah.
don't know.
Right.
But it does say September 1st, December 1st, March 1st.
Yeah, so it's that, so a date certain, closer,
So you would
As-
prefer August 15th?
would Costa suggest it was.
15 days after.
August 15th, November 15th,
Tax
February
payments are
15th,
due.
May 15th.
I think we could present that to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they would go for it.
I don't think that would be an issue. It'd just be probably an adjustment in their warrants or,
Right.
So I mean, so it's like 15 days earlier.
yeah.
So the issue of, there's some lost interest, it now becomes very minimal.
Right. That was, because that was one of the top Field's questions, was if they went month to month, they would lose the interest over the
Yeah,
3 months.
It was like $400. I don't know.
$300 a year.
Yeah, I was gonna say, where are they
I thought it was
investing their
Yeah.
money?
$400 a month.
Interest rates aren't very high, right?
Okay, so that's the payment part. Are we done with our discussion on the rolling average?
The only thing I want to point out, I was doing some research on this, with the rolling average, the towns would actually have to vote to approve that method every year.
What?
Why every year? We don't vote it.
That's in the statute.
What?
So it just becomes like a,
So as for the town meeting warrant, item 1 would be to apportion the regional school district budget based on this method. Item 2 would be the budget number.
But you only do that until you get to 5
No, you do it every year, forever.
Okay.
forever.
We can't overwrite it in our
So
contract?
there's two, so the state outlines two methods. We are using what they call the statutory method, which is
Okay.
right outlined in chapter 71, section 16B. That's the year over year.
Whatever the enrollment
The October
was.
1 enrollment.
Okay.
There is an alternative method that is also outlined in 16B, but with an with the alternative method, it has to be unanimously approved by town meeting every year to use the alternative method.
Unanimously?
Yes.
Should we call Naomi?
You can call her, and I'm reading it right off the DESI
I
website.
mean, it just,
And that's
is
regardless
this,
of what the district agreement.
That's regardless, so
Because
that,
it's not
right,
the state law.
it's, yeah.
But, so how do most districts formed in the recent past have some kind of multi-year averaging? So
According to this is from the Department of Education. I don't see a date on it, but according to this, it's a document called Guidance for Regional School Districts. And one of the key pieces was assessment methodologies. If they have that alternate method, according to the department's guidance, all members of the regional school district must unanimously approve this method. A vote must be taken each year to utilize this method.
All members, aren't we the members of the
Yeah, I
regional
was
school?
thinking that.
No, it's the members, they're talking about member
Members of
communities.
the town.
The
So
member
you're saying-
communities, town meeting.
And unanimous, you mean just all three towns?
All three
Not
town
every
meetings.
single person at every
No,
town meeting?
all three town meetings every year have to approve
Oh,
the
okay.
alternative method.
Because that's not a big deal. I thought you meant like I thought you meant unanimous.
No, I'm sorry, yeah, not unanimous, not unanimous
You're always gonna have
people
one.
there, but
Oh.
all three towns would have to take a vote every year to say, yes, we agree to do this.
All right, well, we should discuss that with our
Yeah.
town reps. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
I was thinking about
Yeah,
it.
thanks,
Wait a minute. The interesting, why I forgot about it was the interesting wrinkle is if you have a two-town district and both towns approve the budget with an alternative method, they just assume the state doesn't make them do a separate vote. So we never had to.
And
Well,
that
that's why we have
document
you.
that you were
One of
reading
many.
from, you don't know a date that it
It
was.
says, the Board of Education approved amendments to the regulations governing regional school districts, 603 CMR 41, at its meeting on January 23rd, 2007. The revised regulations became effective on February 9th, 2007. The purpose of these amendments is to clarify the procedural requirements governing regional school district budgets. So, this is,
It's definitely still in place because in May and June of last year, when we were really uncertain around revenue, I prepared a 1/12 budget and spent a lot of time with the Department of Education, and that was one of the questions they asked me. What's your methodology? And have you gotten approval? So I said, I don't need approval because we're statutory. And then that made my process with them go really smoothly. So that document that Mike's referring to is kind of our little cheat sheet
yeah.
when it comes to.
How do you do the budget?
How do you do the budget?
Actually, if you want to know how the budget gets put together, they have a full step-by-step,
Oh, there you go, Terry.
how it's
I
all
just found it
apportioned.
online.
Okay, there you go.
How it's all,
I'll
how
email
regional
it to you.
district
Please provide
budgets
a summary.
are assembled. It's really
We're gonna give you a
spelled
quiz
out
next
for this.
But I don't think that should
I'm reading
prohibit
the
us.
statute.
No, it's just, you just have to remember that it's an extra step that you're gonna have to take to do this every year.
If
And
that's
they-
part of like a consent agenda or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right.
So to me, that's not a big deal, but
Okay,
Okay,
you just gotta
so,
remember to do it,
Yeah, exactly.
because then we have to report, on our October 1 report, we have to tell the commissioner that we're using an alternative method than the statute.
I wonder if that's subject to change by a home rule petition.
I don't know.
Good luck with that.
well, that's what I
Work on
wondered
that.
too. Like there must be a way to change it because
It makes no sense.
it doesn't make any
Well,
sense.
yeah, as I said, in two-town
It makes no
regions, you
sense.
don't have to take a separate vote, so.
Okay.
Unless like half your town's population goes away in a year and then maybe a town doesn't want it, but I don't really see any other reason to have it. All right.
interesting.
So does anyone have an issue starting in fiscal '23? So that
Ross
would
has
be,
been waiting this since
I
like.
know,
from
Like
2003.
2007.
I'm just, happy we're having this discussion after it's not, it took 8 years to have it, but.
Do we need to make a motion?
So I'll move that we propose the amendments to the towns, the cleanup ones, the rolling 5 into the 5-year average, and on the payment of operating costs, keep it quarterly with, payments due August 15th, November 15th, May 15th, and February 15th and May 15th.
I second. Any discussion? Okay, you're already eyeing. Okay. We'll do a
They
roll.
are.
Oh, wait, yeah, just raise
Just
your
hanging
hand.
right along with them.
All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that's unanimous. Arity, are you still there?
Eric?
All right, so, and we don't know. Arity is no longer in the meeting. Okay.
And I would also suggest to the towns that they may want to consider doing, each amendment separately.
Yep.
So that, you don't, it's all three by all 3 towns to make any change. So if some town wants to reject one, the other 2 can still go forward.
Okay, got that too. All right, so we probably need to have you guys need
We
to
have
have another meeting
well,
with the
yeah.
town officials you've been meeting with,
Yeah, we have a meeting scheduled for
Well,
February.
we can follow up with them.
or whatever,
Somehow,
talk to them.
yeah,
Okay, all right,
Right, Melissa?
lost Melissa.
Okay, that's right.
Anything else, Melissa?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right. I'm going to move on to subcommittee reports. We've finished the first one and the third one. Bonnie, do you want to do community engagement?
Sure. So as part of our charge to unify the Tri-Town through engaging the community of Masco, we reached out to the student council, as Stella mentioned, and we asked them what they were doing to engage the community, just to kind of get a sense of they were working on. They talked to us about this really interesting idea of community awards. So we have decided we're going to be meeting on Tuesday, January 26th at 7 p.m. Kind of an odd day for our committee, but odd day of the week for our committee. But we're going to be talking more with student council. They have several representatives that are going to be there talking with us about that idea. We're also going in that meeting to talk some more about the community ambassadors concept that we're still working on. The last thing I just wanted to kind of put out there is that in planning ahead for that subcommittee's meeting, I'd love to get a sense of the best way to coordinate with the budget process. If I'm not sure the best way to host potential listening sessions at what point during our budget process to engage the community on the budget. So I don't know if that is a good conversation for now, or if we just can be thinking about that, because when we have our meeting on Tuesday, they'll put some dates in place. We have those dates in March. On those Mondays, the 3rd and 10th for our, I'm sorry, not 3rd. You know how we have those school committee, if needed.
Oh, the public hearing.
Well, we have if needed,
Deliberations.
we also have public hearings.
No,
We have 2
she's
public
talking-
hearings.
Yeah, so we have 2 public hearings.
She's talking about the extra Mondays we put on the schedule.
Yeah.
For just this.
Yeah, or actually, I guess maybe one of the questions is, do we want to have listening sessions in addition to the public hearing?
I think that is the question.
Yeah.
I do not know the answer, but so the public hearings, the full school committee is involved versus a subcommittee meeting. It's a legally required, well, one of them is legally required. Yeah, and it's protocol. It's something we've been doing for a long time. I think we should stick with the public hearings, encourage people to come to them. I suspect they should be via Zoom, right? Because they can't email their questions, so it can be more interactive to the extent it can be. I think we should stick to that format. I think it's too big a topic to be done at the subcommittee level. I don't know, what do you guys think?
I think you'd have to post it as a full committee meeting.
And then it's a
anyway,
public
and it's
hearing.
another public hearing. And public hearings have specific posting requirements. We actually have to publish them in a newspaper and
yeah.
things like that. So rather than run afoul of the statutes around public hearings.
Well, and that's also a lot of meetings about the budget, and I think I would want to make sure that the same message is getting
I
out.
think the whole committee should hear all the comments anyway.
Okay, so that answers that question, Bonnie.
So that was a no, just translating
Not
it
necessary,
down.
I think, yeah. And then what I thought you were, I know you're still going, but I have a question. One, in the past, the Community Engagement Committee and the Budget Sub have kind of coordinated getting the word out about what's going on in the budget. In addition to what these guys do, but kind of like a summary and getting it out to the community. They've definitely helped. Kind of our version of what we see in the budget. So that's something that we should probably talk about. That usually has been a written, it used to be done in the form of a press release back when we used to do things that way. You post on Facebook, whatever. So that is something that we can talk about. That was more done before the budget was presented this way, so whatever we think might work in the current environment is something we talk about.
And in the past, we also just had someone from the paper, if we would make sure that they were invited and they would write it themselves.
Oh, and we would help, we would also give them some
Yeah.
help writing it too, I think, yeah.
Press release.
Press release, yes. So I think that would be a very good way to help, and I can help with that, and Zilly's group can help with that too.
So it sounds like we need to engage each other here on this
We
topic
do, we need to, school
separately?
committee engage.
I feel like part of that public relations press release thing has a lot to do with the drivers of what's coming in, and I feel like after hearing from Pete, Phil, and Patty, we might have more of the story.
Oh, yeah, we're not even close to writing something like that right now.
Well, unfortunately, there's only a short window between when this starts and when it ends, so we are kind of close. We just, I think, need to wait till after that to kind of get the whole story.
Well, and I know we try to time it to get out there in the paper or online before the town meetings. That is kind of our goal, because that's when the vote on the budget is. So that's what I have in my mind, which is sometime in April is when we would want to get something.
Right, I forgot we have not.
Yeah, if town meetings actually happen.
Oh, stop saying that. Okay.
Then there's that.
So it's April timing for finalizing it,
Yeah.
kind of, because of the cycle and all that.
So we do have that.
I think so. Bonnie, did you have?
No,
I probably raised more questions.
No,
than
that's good.
answers.
That's good information. I think that's very helpful. I guess part of, at one point when we started doing the listening sessions, there was some, I think it was Costa who mentioned, this would be really interesting if, we start having community members who are not, who are not Masco parents coming to our listening sessions, especially when we're talking about the budget. And
Yeah,
so
I
I
do.
just sort of had that flag as something we may be doing. But you're saying that's the purpose of the public
Public
sessions,
hearings.
the public hearings that we already have scheduled. So our subcommittee doesn't need to.
Yeah, I think we were hoping that the budget could kind of be more of a year-round topic. I think that's kind of what we were getting at. But for the specific budget approval, I think we should stick to the to the hearings.
And one last thing, just at the public, the fact that there are 2 public hearings wasn't always for the newer members. Like, there used to just be the one on the same night as the vote. So this committee wanted more time to absorb the public input into the deliberations.
Actually, yeah.
So it effectively is a listening session. It's just a public hearing, a second public hearing.
That was just last year, these 2.
Was that
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was last year or the year before.
Yeah, it's something we
I think it
something we
was just
started,
last year.
because I agree with
Oh,
you. The statute says the committee has to approve the budget at a public hearing,
Yeah,
which makes no sense because it's already done at that point.
yeah.
So having a public hearing in advance where you can actually take input and maybe have it reflected in the budget would make
Makes
sense.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Tasha, sorry, I skipped over DCI. I've been doing that all year because it's a little bit on hold given everything going on. Does anyone have an issue with that approach? I heard some mumblings at some point. No? Okay. All right, Tasha, anti-racism?
We met last Monday, we will be meeting again this coming Monday. Our focus last Monday was to kind of put everything back together. We ended the year with that conversation with the students here of the different clubs. And so I think we were a little overwhelmed and we needed to know where to go with that. So we kind of reorganized and refocused, I would say, on what we're going to be doing next, which is on the agenda for next week. But we're going to start working on that policy that we want to do. And Glenn Kuchar is going to be joining us on Monday to offer words of wisdom or whatever else we will gain from his knowledge. Melissa and I are going to have a chat on Friday, finally. So we're going to start back towards the policy. We are going to be focused on thinking about the Indigenous people versus Columbus Day question, since we couldn't make a decision last time. So we're going to try and make a decision and hopefully check that off as a decision made and bring it to you guys. And look at what we can do, I guess, to support. It's a really tricky position we're in because a lot of it really doesn't have to do with us. As school committee members, a lot of it is really on administration or the principals and what they're doing in the school. So we want to make sure that we're not crossing a line that we shouldn't be crossing and we're staying within our school committee lane. So that's why we're working on policy, because that's definitely our lane. So, that's us.
Okay, thank you.
Unless you guys know.
Okay, is that it? All right, so the last one is liaisons to the elementary school committees. Does anyone have any updates about what's going on with them?
Milton is working on budget.
Yeah, same with Foster. I talked
Yeah.
to them, they said just their budget process is starting now.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, moving to the consent agenda. There are 2 items on it: approval of the December 16th and January 6th, 2021 meeting minutes, and warrants of $1,096,601.93 signed since January 6th, 2021.
Move to accept.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. All right. Arity? All right, everyone here raised their hands. I'm just saying this for our secretary who is listening online. So it passed and Arity is not at the meeting. Okay. All right, that is it for our public meeting. I'm going to move to adjourn into executive session for the purposes of discussing strategy relative to collective bargaining with the Masconomet Teachers Association.
Not to return.
Okay. I've determined that holding this discussion in open session may have a detrimental impact on the district's bargaining position.
You have to say we're not going to.
Okay, so we're not going to, we just stand. Sorry. We are not going to return to public session. Do you have a second on that? Thank you. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Okay, thank you. TJ, we're good? Thank you.